Hello, Christine.
Good evening, Professor Alain Desoulieres. I'm so pleased to be in conversation with you tonight. So, Professor, you are a specialist of Urdu literature and history of India, and you taught for many years at the French Institute of Oriental Languages. You taught at Sorbonne University and gave lectures in GNU, Mysore, Mumbai, even Shanghai University. You have translated a lot of works and you did a lot of research, but you have translated an anthology of Urdu poetry
Yes.
and also an Urdu short story written by Sadat Hassan Manto.
Yes.
I was wondering, how did you get this passion for the Urdu language?
Yes. First of all, it's quite an old story because it brings me back to 1972.
Hmm.
So I taught in Paris. I taught for 36 years, if my memory doesn't fail me. How I was attracted to Urdu literature. First of all, I was always attracted by literary translation and compared literature as well as history. I grew up partly in Spain, and my first posting in university level was in Toledo University. And as you may know, Toledo in medieval ages was known as the city of the three cultures. It was the first ever uh, city in Europe to have a center of translators for Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew.
Mm.
And from those days, I got uh, I was attracted by old literature and also by translations of Arabic Spanish literature into Spanish. I did not learn any Arabic, just the alphabets. I could read, that's all.
So, which means that you discover Urdu in Toledo.
No, a bit later. In Toledo, I discovered India
Yeah.
because those years, you see, the 1970, they were the years of the ways of Kathmandu.
Mm.
And we were all fascinated, you know. I had seen Granada in Spain. I mean, Orient was not so distant after all.
Mhm.
And when times for the military service came, so the French Republic called me. I had to go back to France, and I was sent for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a French teacher in South Asia.
Mm.
And I was there between India and Pakistan for 11 years.
Ooh,
Yes.
long time. Is it at that time that you decided to become a literary translator? How what were your first step? I mean, in translation, and when did you decide to translate and to write this anthology of Urdu poetry?
That came much later. When I was posted in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
I was going very, very often to India, and I had to teach Urdu literature anyway. So you cannot teach Urdu literature in France without translating. It's impossible because students, they cannot reach the level of uh, readership. They are not, even in 3 years, you see, even 4 years, it's difficult for them to apprehend Urdu literature from the original. So translating from Urdu into French was a daily work for me.
Mm.
And later on, I never knew I could translate poetry. Frankly, I never knew. A publisher approached me, Bûcher-Chastel,
Mhm.
and they wanted me to translate an anthology of Urdu poetry.
Mm.
By the way, they thought I would do it through English, which I would never do, of course. And it so happens that I was, in those days, I was very much fascinated by the poetry of Faiz Ahmed Faiz. I had met him twice,
Okay.
yes, and I absolutely wanted to translate Faiz Ahmed Faiz in that anthology, which I did.
Mhm.
But the Bûcher-Chastel publishers, they were not very much interested in publishing a big volume. You know, they, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? Yes.
Yeah.
They were interested in a pocket edition, and they were not interested in a bilingual edition. And I always wanted bilingual editions
Mm.
because it's my belief that bilingual editions are far more useful than monolingual translation. So, for example, I was allowed to uh, make one page of bilingual translation,
Mm.
only one.
Mm.
But
That is. Mm.
later on, you know, I participated to many conferences in literature, in compared literature,
Mm.
and then I did publish, uh, I say, chapters or a short novel, either in Urdu or in French. And I mean, the Urdu was the original version,
Mm.
but revised.
Mhm.
Yes. And you were mentioning short novels,
Yes,
short
Urdu
stories.
stories.
So this is what I did.
Toba Texing. Mm.
Yes, but it's 34 stories actually, and uh, 400 pages.
Mm.
That was also in Bûcher-Chastel in 2008,
Mm.
immediately after the anthology of poetry. And again, I was not allowed to um, to publish bilingual, but I did that in reviews, in in some journals. I did a bit. Yes.
So you moved from Toledo to Paris. You taught in Alco. Tell us about this cheap, I mean unique institution in France dedicated to Oriental languages, established, if I'm not wrong, in 1795.
Yes.
The Urdu chair was founded at the mid 19th century, right?
It is 1830.
18.
1830.
Mm.
Yes. Very,
Tell,
very early.
tell us about this institution
You
because
see,
this is the
the
institution in France, in Paris, where you can study a lot of rare languages.
yes, rare languages for the point of view of Europe, naturally.
Yeah, you're right.
uh,
You're right.
uh, we have, I think, 92 languages
Mm.
of the world, and out of them, seven Indian languages, including Urdu, Sinhali, and Bengali, and also Ram, you know, the language of the Gypsies, which
Mm.
is also an Indian language.
Mm.
And in that aspect, we're a unique institution.
Mm.
And regarding Urdu and Urdu translation, Garcin de Tassy, who was the first professor of Hindustani, he published an Indian author in Urdu and French, I say, in Urdu and French. That was, oh, I forgot. 1 second. Uh, um, he published Mirdad. I'll tell you. It was Garson Tassi was the first ever scholar who published Urdu and print Urdu.
Yeah.
That was the first time in 1840 in France. Wali, he published Wali Gujarati. And he had a first-hand knowledge of the manuscripts. And that is quite remarkable. And I had to work on Garson Tassi's life, and I have all his works, and he was a model later on, of course. Now,
Yes,
I
please.
would come to more actual problems, because translating has changed a lot. With two main aspects, I would say. First of all, illustration. 19th century was a great epoch for illustrating translations, and illustrations became an adjuvant, a help, a very needed help for translation. It became a way of translating. For example, look at this illustration of R.K. Narayan. You see it? That is Swami and Friends.
This is a Malgudi School Days, right?
Malgudi School Days, which is a modern version of Swami and Friends.
Yeah.
A school version.
Yeah. Why did you decide to study this translation adaptation to the screen of these Malgudi School Days?
Because when I was teaching in Delhi, in JNU, I think that was 2015, I was looking for models of multiple translation. That is, the concept of translation is now very wide. It includes TV and cinema adaptation. Adaptation is now called audiovisual translation.
Yeah.
And Narayan has been translated beautifully into French. You see? And also illustrated, but in a very different way. And there was a very interesting attitude by the French translator, Swami et ses amis, that was translated by Anne-Cécile Padoue. And she took another illustrator, you see, not Narayan was illustrated by his brother, Lakshman, who was a cartoonist for the press also. So those illustrations would not speak to the French reader. And she took a French illustrator, Françoise Boudignon, who made a beautiful job to introduce Indian civilization, as you can judge even by the cover. You see, if you compare, you see, can you see both?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
So I reflected on these, you know, the paper, the role of translation, illustrated, the role of illustration, the importance of still image. And that also led me to the cinema adaptation, because cinema adaptation from literature very often used used illustrations from the print edition,
Mhm.
and the cinema adaptation usually is from translated literature and also from illustrated literature.
Mhm. So do you think that this audiovisual adaptation of classical literature helps to read this classical literature?
Definitely, definitely. You see, it's quite funny that the first people who made Maupassant available to Indian schoolboys,
Mhm.
they were the Indian themselves, not the French.
Tell us
So
about, yes, tell us more about the translation adaptation to the screen of Maupassant's
yes,
Perle.
yes. Oof. Uh, can
Hmm.
you see it?
Katasagar. What does it mean?
Katha Sagar. It means an ocean of story.
Oh, okay.
Katha is story and Sagar is ocean.
Hmm.
By the way, it is a very convenient name because the founders, the publishers, they were the brothers Sagar,
Hmm.
and they were from Lahore. And they had started adapting literature to the TV screen, and that was those were the times of Indira Gandhi.
Mhm.
So the Congress Party wanted to use television to educate people.
But why Maupassant?
Maupassant has always been taught in India as a European author in English.
Okay. So
It's
it was translated from English into Hindi and then adapted to the screen.
Oh, he was never translated into Hindi.
Oh,
Uh, he was adapted into Hindi. Some of his stories inspired Premchand and inspired Manto as well.
mm, mm,
That is another story. But the Sagar brothers and also Shyam Benegal, who adapted most of 13 stories of Maupassant for Katha Sagar,
mhm.
that was in TV series, and later on it came into cassettes, and then in video, you see, uh, a luxury edition actually,
Mhm.
with a booklet, you know, and it sold very, very well.
Mm.
And the purpose of
It was,
Katha Sagar was
yeah.
to introduce the younger readers, the young readers, to the novel, and precisely the story, the short novel, the
Mm,
story.
mhm,
So in India, in Indian modern literature, novel didn't catch much. It's more short story that was a success.
mm,
And it was mostly inspired by French and Russian literature,
mm, mhm,
translated into English.
mhm,
And so did Shyam Benegal. He used a translation of Maupassant, 1900, a very old one. You see, Maupassant was translated into English immediately. He used to publish uh, in uh, in newspapers in Normandy, and in Normandy in those days it was full of English people.
mm.
And when they would like a story, they had it published almost immediately in England in English. So Maupassant was published at the same time in England as well as in France. And thanks to Katasagar, I discovered a story of Maupassant translated in English in 1900 that is nowhere in French. It has been lost. The name is The Debt, La Dette, and in Hindustani it is Do Tasveere, and it has a beautiful Hindi version, I mean the dialogues. And I looked everywhere in the National Library, everywhere for that original French version of La Dette, The Debt, and I could not find it.
Okay.
So in a way, the Indian director, Shyam Benegal, he has been, he has rendered a great service to world literature and also to short story, including French literature.
What is today the importance of Urdu text, classical or contemporary text, translated into French and vice versa?
Not much, I would say, so far. So far. Of course, we have Maupassant, sorry, excuse me, Balzac. Balzac has a short allusion in a short novel of his to Urdu literature, just one sentence. But it was since Garsantassi translations, Balzac in his fantastic stories often refers to Urdu literature without knowing. He had an indirect knowledge. And the Urdu version of the Arabian Nights, the Urdu version of the Arabian Nights is better known than the Arabic version. And all French version of the Arabian Nights up till today, they actually rely on Indian and Hindustani versions, but indirectly.
Oh, I understand. Many literature translators have a special relationship with authors. What kind of relationship do you establish with the author you translate?
First of all, I try to work independently. The first really,
which means
which means without the author. First of all, I make sure that I have the author's agreement, his authorization for translating. That is the first thing. And after that, I consider that if you work with the author, you will disagree all the time.
This is also very interesting to share and to point out the difficulties of translation from one language to another language.
Yes.
And
yes.
also to understand the context, the environment of the translation of the author.
For example, for Manto,
yeah,
I visited the Manto family several times.
Okay, you met the family.
Yes, I was allowed to see his papers and made many photographs of his personal papers, including letters and newspaper cutting, because he worked as a newspaper editor, as a journalist, for many years.
So it's also why we can say you are a translator, but you are also historian, because
Yes.
it's all elements, documents, photographs,
Yes. Yes,
materials help you to understand his environment of writing, I guess.
definitely. If
Mm.
you haven't seen Mumbai, for example, if you do not know the history of the cinema of Mumbai, you cannot translate Manto. It
Okay.
is not well known. It has come quite late. Manto inspired and worked for many, many film directors.
Mm. Mhm.
And on the beginning, it was thought that he had directly written 8 scripts for films for Bollywood.
So,
Uh, Now it is more than 20, and the research is not over. The difficulty is that Manto was typewriting on stencil, on bad paper,
mm.
and he would have only one copy,
Mhm.
give it to the publisher, and very often these papers were not kept. They were destroyed.
Oh. Mhm.
So it's a great pity. For
Mm.
example, speaking of translation,
Yeah.
Manto um, made a translation cum adaptation
Mhm.
of the last day of uh, Convict by Victor Hugo,
Mhm.
the last day of Le Dernier Jour d'un Condamné à Mort.
Mm.
So he made a beautiful Urdu version, which was actually an adaptation, and that went into cinema also,
Mm.
but in a disguised way.
Mm.
So coming back to translation, I could quote on some people who worked with Indian authors
Mhm.
and without knowing the original language, through English,
Mm.
checking with the authors. And that is very wrong.
Yeah.
First of all, because you do not have an inner feeling of the language itself.
You have,
And
sorry to interrupt you, do you have some example of wrong translated because we translate, for example, Hindi novel into French, but not from the Hindi language, but from the English one? You
yes,
have some
yes.
example of short phrases?
I cannot quote directly,
Mhm.
but I know that Ismat Chugtai, for example, was wrongly translated from Urdu,
Mm.
from English actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Manto also was wrongly translated because his first translator in English, he uh, did not agree with so many metaphors by Manto. He would cut them.
Mhm.
So
I perfectly understand your point because it's also why at the French Institute in India, we promote the translation from French into Indian languages. For example, if there is a French author translated in English, for sure we have a lot.
yes,
The facility is to translate from English into Indian languages, but the
yes,
result is not satisfied at all.
yes,
So it's
yes,
why through our program, Paptagore, we promote the translation from French language into Indian languages, but also Indian languages into French directly.
yeah, yes. Let me quote my student Bhavna Singhmar from JNU.
Uh-huh.
Uh, she is also in addition to her PhD, she is translating Le Petit Nicolas
Yeah.
into Hindi, into Hindi.
Mhm.
And let me see. She also used the cinema adaptation naturally, but while translating into Hindi, she naturally came into many problems. And she saw that the English translators of Le Petit Nicolas, they had, sort of escaped the problems. For example, how do you translate, or do you translate or not, the nicknames of the characters?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm? So in Hindi, you can.
Yeah.
Nicola, no, because it's the name of the hero that you cannot change.
Yeah.
A Hindi translator, made for not Le Petit Nicolas, another novel with Le Petit Nicolas, he made Nikku,
Yeah.
which is not so bad because it echoes the Punjabi Nikka, which means small.
Ah, TK. And it sounds like the sound is like Nicola. I mean, so
Yes, it's not so bad.
yeah, it's a
But
mix, it's a balance, it's a mix, it's combination between the French, between the Punjabi sound and Hindi rhythm. Yeah.
yes, but you lose something, you see? So my student, she was telling me, oh, those French names, they are not easy in Hindi. Couldn't I adapt Hindi names everywhere, proper names? I
Mm,
said, if they are nicknames translatable, if they do mean something, yes.
mm.
If they don't, keep them as proper names. And also, you see, you have to give a taste of French to the young readers. If you make it all adapted to Indian context, then it is not French literature anymore.
Yeah, yeah. You know, we support the publisher of Asterix. It's a
Yes,
huge work of translation from
I
French
know.
into Hindi. Can you imagine how?
Yes.
Because and it was one of my questions I wanted to ask you. Can you speak more about the creative potential of translation? A translator for me is also an author, and
Yes.
the power, the potential, the creative potential of translation is also a new literary work when you
Of
translate.
course, in any case,
Yeah,
do we know of any literature, I say any modern, let us say modern literature, which did not start by translation?
yeah, yeah.
You see, translation is at the very root of literary translation, literary creation.
Correct. Mm, definitely. Mm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean,
You already have a long, many years of experience of translation. I think in during this Valley of Words festival, uh, we have students or maybe translator who are listen to you. What advice will you give to a young translator?
well, like I said, do not work with the author
I'm
because,
surprised. I'm
yes,
really surprised.
because the author, you see, he changes. He may not agree anymore with what he published.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
he will influence you.
Yes, but yeah, I totally understand.
Yes, and there is also a very important point
Uh-huh.
is you see, um, you should be free in creating your own translation.
Mhm.
So if there is a break,
Mhm.
and there are many breaks anyway,
Yeah.
it, it's for you to overcome. For example, I would quote my former publisher in Bûcher-Chastel. I was reread, which is natural, by a young lady
Mhm.
uh, for the sake of the French prose while I was translating Manto.
Mm.
And I was translating one of the most poetic stories by Manto, which is unfortunately very little known. It is Diwali ke Diye, the lamps of Diwali. It is hardly 2 pages, but it is actually a poem, just like a poem, you know. And it's everybody in the street. You see, you have the lights of Diwali.
Yeah.
The diye, the lamps, are a light,
Mm-hmm.
and one by one, the people of the street come in the light of the diye,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a short description of everyone. So there is the worker who is very tired and wondering how could he buy a lamp. There is the little girl, uske mutti mein ek paisa hai. She has a small coin in her hand, and she wants to buy. She runs to buy a diya, a lamp. And you have the lover, the young boy, who is looking at the window of his beloved. She opened and she closes, and that's all, you know. And all of a sudden, a gust of wind comes, and all the lights that were so happy, they are off. Now you have to know that this novel, you have to know the context. It was written in the 1940s. It was a Hindu association that had approached Manto in Lahore. They had asked him to write something about Diwali, which was widely celebrated even in Muslim towns. They had said, please write something on Diwali. We are so much worried about those killings, you know. Please. So Manto did. And it's a beautiful poem. So my reader, the French reader, she said, hey, you are repeating yourself.
Professor, and this is, I'm very happy because we are, you know, Diwali is just next Saturday, and you spoke about this nice and beautiful poem. May I ask
It is it is a short story,
a short story?
but very close to poem.
Okay, yeah. May I ask you to read maybe an abstract of Urdu text that you particularly love?
I'll see. One second.
First,
I,
you
I,
know, it's so interesting to have the music of the language when we are not as French. We are not we are not used to
if
listen
I can
to Urdu.
look for.
Just a small sentences.
Yes, I have one here.
Mm-hmm.
One second.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to listen to these languages on the north part of
So
India.
कहानी का उन्वान ये है दिवाली के दिए चुटकी मुंदीर पर दिवाली के दिए हामते हुए बच्चों के दिल की तरह धड़क रहे थे. Donc les lampes de Diwali, comme les cœurs des enfants, voyez, sautillaient parce qu'elles sont remuées par le vent. Elles sont accrochées à des ficelles. Munni, is the little girl. Hein? Munni दौड़ती हुई आई अपनी नन्ही सी घघरी को दोनों हाथों से ऊपर उठाए छत के नीचे गली में मोरी के पास खड़ी हो गई. उसकी उसकी रुई हुई आंखों में मंदिर पर फैले हुए दियों ने कई चमकीले नगीने जर दिए. Les lampes sont de véritables personnages,
Mhm.
voyez, et
Oh,
elles animent le sourire de la petite fille.
lovely. Maybe just
उसका
one more because we will have 3 minutes again. No more.
उसका नन्हा सा सीना दिए की लो की तरह दिए की लू की तरह कांपा. मुस्कुराकर उसने अपनी मुट्ठी खोली. पैसे से भागा भागा हुआ पैसा देखा. पसीने से, sorry, je relis cette phrase. I'm reading again. उसका नन्हा सा सीना दिए की लू की तरह कांपा. Her little breast, just like the swinging of the lamps,
Mhm.
she was
Yeah.
like this. Huh? Uh,
Sri
because of
Alanji,
emotion.
Sri
And then
Alanji.
she opens, sorry, she opens her fist, and in the fist, pasine se bhiga hua, there was um, a little coin full of sweat. And then she runs to buy the diya.
Alan ji, बहुत धन्यवाद. Even if my Hindi is not enough, I would love to work with you and to improve my Hindi. Thank you so much for
Oh,
this
a
time.
last
Yes, please.
a last advice I would give
Yes.
is to take care of illustrations,
Mm.
especially if you work on classical literature. You know, classical literature needs illustration,
Mhm. Mhm.
and Indian illustration, of course.
Yes, and Indian illustration are so beautiful
They
and
are, they are,
yes, yes, it
they are.
makes sense.
I'm working these days on Ghalib, illustrated Ghalib, for example. Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much, Professor. बहुत धन्यवाद.
कोई बात नहीं.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your advice. It was a pleasure to have you in this in
This is the Urdu text, Diwali ke diye.
lovely, lovely. Thank you so much, and see you soon in Paris, Missouri, and I
Yeah,
hope in India,
yeah,
of
yeah.
course.
I wish Swami and Friends was retranslated in French.
Malgré.
Look at these beautiful illustrations.
Yes, yes, absolutely nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the illustration, for the books, for your passion of Urdu literature and history of India. And I'm sure that the audience will have a lot of questions.
Yeah,
And yes, please.
I shall be extremely pleased to participate, even from far away. Now,
Thank you so much again. Thank you,
कोई
Daniel.
बात नहीं.
Bye bye.
फिर मिलेंगे. Namaskar.
Namaskar.